Hey, thanks for checking out this video from the Handy Dandy Andy channel. My name is Andrew. I'm your host. Today I'm going to be telling you how we made homemade applesauce. And it was a big project to can all this applesauce, but totally worth it. So let me show you how we did it, and I'll even tell you why it's red. Let's get going. All right, so the applesauce is amazing. I've had people tell me, like, why are you doing applesauce? That's for kids. And then they try this applesauce and they're like, this is amazing. I can't believe you made it yourself. So I'll just start right out of the gate with why it's red. We use Red Hots, the cinnamon candy, to give the red flavor, or the red look, but also a cinnamon flavor. And it's not too hot. So even if you don't like Red Hots, you'll still like this applesauce. It's delicious. So the first step is to get a bunch of apples together. We usually use 3 varieties of apples. It helps get the apple texture, the consistency a little bit better, and also helps with flavor. So we do like Rome or Red Delicious, Golden Delicious. If you can get some really cheap Honey Crisps, that's great. So just get a variety of apples, and we found that works the best. So the first step is going to be washing the apples. So you'll take the apple, get it in some cold water, and use just a little bit of Dawn dish soap, and then scrub the apple. That gets the chemically film off of the apple, and that's really all we're doing. You don't have to worry about taking the stem off. The next step is to take the flour off the bottom. So to deflour it, we took a potato peeler, or you can have a knife, and you just stab the apple from the bottom and just work it around in a circle real quick, and that'll pull the flour out. Throw that in the trash, and then now you have the apple that's ready for the next step. So the next step is to cut it into small pieces. You can do this with a knife and a cutting board, but it takes a long time. One way that we found is a lot faster, way more efficient, is to use a potato a device that's made to make French fries or like potato wedges. So you just set the apple in it, and then you just crank it down, and it spits out an apple that's cut, 6 or 7 different ways, 6 or 7 different slices. So that's really efficient, because you can see how fast right here. It's just like apple in, boom, apple's done. Apple in, boom, apple's done. So you can go through a lot of apples really fast. And for us, we're doing 450 pounds of apples. We're making a lot of applesauce. So we wanted something that was streamlined, and we do this every year, and we have a bunch of families that come in and go in together on it. We do the whole project in less than 24 hours. So we started in the evening to wash the apples and to deflour them and to cut them. And the reason why we started in the evening is because we wanted to get as much done on Saturday, the next morning, as possible. And because we cut the apples, we didn't want them to turn brown at night, so we put them in just a trash bag. Now, it's important when you use a trash bag not to use the scented kind. You don't want a scented trash bag. You don't want your apples smelling like lemons. So get an unscented trash bag, put them in there, and you can keep it closed overnight, and that'll help prevent the oxidizing so it doesn't turn brown. You also don't want to leave the apples outside. You don't want them to freeze at night either. So here we are the next morning. It's time to cook the apples and really start making the applesauce. So you get your big pot, and then you put apples in it, and then you fill water in until the apples are floating, and you want to leave about 3 or 4 inches from the top of the pot, just completely empty. Now the reason why is because as the water boils and as it starts to cook the apples are going to kind of absorb the water and expand, and in some ways it doesn't make sense, because the same amount of water that's in the apple in there, it's like ice cube. You'd think that, hey, you put ice in a glass of water and then the ice melts, the water should like go over the top, but it doesn't do that because the ice contracts. Well, the apples expand. Like somehow there's just more water than there was before, and the apples will expand a little bit. So just leave a little bit of space when you're starting to cook the apples. And then every few minutes, just go through and just stir the apples and get the apples that are on the top down to the bottom, so they rotate and have time to cook. The purpose of this, we're really just kind of getting the apples a little bit mushy, squishy, so it can go through the grinder a lot easier, and you can get a lot more applesauce out of each apple. So after it's cooked for, it's 30 to 40 minutes, you'll see that the apples are really soft now, and then now you'll transport it close to where the grinder is. For us, we used a cooler, one of those big coolers, and we just dumped it in there. We wanted to keep the applesauce warm because when we do the actual canning process, you want the applesauce warm. So we wanted, through the whole process, we tried to keep it warm. That's why it's in the cooler. You don't have to use a cooler. It'll just take more time to can later. So we have it in the cooler, and now you scoop it up, put it in the grinder. You're gonna put it in the hopper, and then you'll just plunge it. You'll just put a bunch in, keep plunging, and now you'll see that what comes out is this amazing applesauce. And it's warm, and it is delicious. So make sure you taste test that as you're going through. And it's just fresh apples. And without even added sugar, and it just tastes amazing. So that's the applesauce. We just caught it in like the regular cake pans, the metal cake pans, and then we dump that into a 16 quart pot. But you'll notice here that we're taking the leftovers of the apples that has the apple skins, the apple fibers, the apple seeds, and the stems. We're taking all of that and we're putting it back in the hopper, and you're going to process it through the grinder 3 times. Do at least 3 times. On one of the batches I did 4 times. You'll do that for a couple of reasons. One, you get more applesauce out of it. When you've already paid for the apples, you might as well get as much applesauce as possible. But the other reason is it actually adds to the consistency. It makes the applesauce a lot thicker. So you can see here that this is really thick applesauce, and you get that thickness from the fibers in the apples. So I like applesauce that is thick and filling, and it doesn't just slop around on your plate because it's all water. This has a lot of fiber in it. So make sure to grind it a couple of times. You may have to stop and pause halfway through to clean out the fibers out of the little like that mesh, that metal mesh where the applesauce is being pushed through. You might have to clean that off to help the process get going faster again, but it's worth doing. So put it through 3 or 4 times and set it aside in something. All right, so now we're going to the pot that has all the applesauce. It's a 16 quart pot, and we're not going to fill it all the way to the top, but this one will make about 14 or 15 quarts of applesauce. So I put a little bit of heat on it. We want to keep it warm. We don't want it to boil, but we also don't want it to cool down. We want to retain the heat. So now we're going to add our sugar and our red hots. So for a 16 quart pot, we're going to do 2 cups of regular sugar, 2 cups of white sugar, and then we're going to do 2 boxes of the theater style red hots. So the same size of box that you get when you go to theater and get a box of red hots, you're going to use that, and you can put it in the applesauce. And another benefit of having the applesauce warm is it helps melt the red hots. It helps distribute the cinnamon and the red throughout the whole pot. Here's a pro tip for you. When you start dumping the applesauce into the pot, only fill the pot about halfway up with applesauce, then put in your sugar and your red hots, and then fill it the rest of the way after you've stirred it. So halfway up, sugar, red hots, stir, let it get red, and then add the rest of it in, and that'll help mix the sauce around a lot better, get the cinnamon and sugar everywhere. So the red hots, we wanted to make sure that the red hots really get absorbed and dissolve, and one way we ensured that was to just grind them up into small pieces. So instead of having a big red hot that would have to dissolve, it's just small little flakes of sugar. So it's just a powder. So we used a food processor for that. You just put dump a box in there. We did 1 box at a time and then just let it grind until it's just a powder, and then dump it in there, mix it together. As you mix the pot, you'll see that it slowly starts to turn red, and just keep mixing for a few minutes, and then now you have your applesauce. Now it's time to actually put it in the jar. So what you'll do is you'll take your jar, and you'll probably have a funnel and a pot, and you'll start filling up the jar. Once the jar is full, which you don't want to fill it all the way up to the rim on the quart jar. You want to go all the way up to the neck, but not completely full. And then once the jar is full of applesauce, make sure you use a towel and clean off the lip, the rim of the quart jar, because you don't want any applesauce on top of it, because if there is applesauce on top, then it's not going to seal properly when you put the lid on. You want that rubber that's on the lid to seal properly to the glass. That's another reason why we heat up the lids. You don't need the water boiling for the lids, you just need it hot. And that helps the rubber seal properly. So we used a magnet, pulled it out of the water, set it on the jar, and then get the ring, tighten it down. Once it's tightened down, we set it aside, and then now we're ready to cook the applesauce to really do the canning. And I don't know why they call it canning, because we're doing it in jars. Shouldn't that be called jarring? But, you know, I don't know. So anyway, so now it's time to can the applesauce. The way you'll do that is you'll take, your pot and have something on the bottom. It could be a piece of wood with some holes in it, or you can have like the metal, like the mesh thing that holds the jars, but you don't want the jar sitting on the bottom of the pot. You need to have it sitting up on something. Then you'll set the jars in the water. You don't want the water to be boiling when you set the jar in the water to do the canning. The reason why is because the water, when it's really hot like that, it can actually crack the glass. And we've had that happen where we set it in and then the glass cracks, and then all the applesauce, you lose a quart, and it's just not worth it. So you can have the water really warm, that's fine. Set all of the jars in, add more water so the water is just above all of the lids, and then bring it to a boil. Once it's boiling, depending on your altitude, we're here like 3,000 feet above sea level, we're boiling it for like 30 minutes. So make sure you boil it long enough, but let's say it's about 30 minutes for you. And then you'll pull it out of the water. You'll set it down on a towel to dry. Not to dry, although it will dry on the towel. You're setting it out to cool. And then we leave a little bit of space between the applesauce jars. That way it can cool a little bit faster. Doesn't need to be a lot of space, but leave a little bit of space. One thing you'll want to do is write on the lids, what year you made the applesauce and that it is applesauce. The applesauce, it's going to last 4 or 5 years as long as you store it in a cool place. So you don't have to do applesauce every single year. You can just plan ahead. Hey, I'm going to need 30 quarts of applesauce, and you can plan for a couple of years in advance with that. So now that you've pulled it out and the applesauce is cooling, after about a couple hours, you're going to want to make sure that it canned properly. So you'll push on the lids. This one canned properly, this one obviously is open, but if it doesn't seal properly, you'll hear a clicking. And that clicking is because the lid didn't seal properly. So if that didn't seal properly, redo the process, or just set that one aside, put it in the fridge, and have that one in the next couple of weeks.
One thing that you'll notice right here is there are a couple of jars that are upside down. This isn't an accident. We realized that as they were cooling, that a couple of them were not sealed. So one pro tip here is if it's not sealed, you can turn it upside down and let it sit for a few minutes, and as it cools, it might seal, so you don't have to repeat the process. So just turn it upside down, let it cool. Worst case scenario, you just have applesauce to eat the next couple of weeks. Best case scenario, it seals and you don't have to restart the process.
That's the whole process. You can see when we're done with making all of the applesauce, this is all that was left over. This is all of the skins and the stems and the seeds. It's less than 1 Rubbermaid container, and we did 450 pounds of apples, and we made 160 quarts of applesauce. And we did that within 24 hours. Now, we had a lot of people, and we had a lot of the 2-burner stoves, and it took a lot of equipment, but we've done this enough to kind of figure out the best way of doing it. And every year we're always looking for something to make it a little bit better, make it a little bit easier, a little bit more efficient. All right, the moment you've all been waiting for, what does it look like and what does it taste like? So let's get a little bit out here. You can see that it's really thick. This is something that a lot of people like. Most people associate applesauce with this like really just sloppy mess, and that's really flavorless. And that's not this. This has a cinnamon flavor to it. It's really good, and you can see the applesauce is really thick. Look at that. Look how good that is. All right. I'm telling you, those Red Hots make this applesauce absolutely amazing. Like, this is the best applesauce I've ever had in my life. And, yep, you won't regret it. Do it. It just has a a hint of cinnamon flavor. It's not super hot, like if you put like 5 Red Hots in your mouth, you get the really hot cinnamon flavor. That's not this. There's not too much sugar. This is just absolutely amazing, and it's red, so that's kind of fun for kids too. I hope you've enjoyed this video on how to make homemade applesauce and how to can it yourself. It does take a lot of work, but we've kind of fine-tuned the process, and it's very unique having red applesauce. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope it's been educational for you, been useful. If you have questions about how we've done something or a certain part of the process, make sure to put it in the comments, because I want to hear from you, and I want to make sure that it's valuable for you. So I'll answer all the comments. Any question you have about the process, I'll put it in I'll reply to your comments. So, all right, well, thanks for checking out this video. Have a good one, everybody.